Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. We are excited to see God do something new in His church through worship, and we want to come alongside of those in worship ministry with encouragement and practical tools for the journey. Welcome, everybody, to the Overflow Worship Podcast. My name is Andrea Olson. I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining us on our fourth episode. This is so exciting. It's a new adventure for me and for the ministry of Overflow Worship. So thank you for joining us. Today, I'm excited to welcome a guest. Jeff Huston is joining us all the way from Litchfield, Minnesota, which is not too far from where I'm at. And Jeff holds a special place in my heart because he is my dad. And so I'm honored to have him today. He currently manages a portfolio of real estate. But one of the things that I just love having watched as I've grown up is that my dad has a unique ability of integrating leadership principles into the context of the local church. And so I've watched him train leadership teams in the church and board members and pastors and leaders for my whole life. And so I just thought this is the perfect opportunity to welcome him into the Overflow Worship family and just get some thoughts on leadership in the church. So Dad, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea. It's great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to just start off with a little bit about you. I'm a relational person, and so are you. And so I would just love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about your experience in leading worship and stepping into other leadership within the church body.
Sure, I'd love to do that, Andrea. It really starts back in high school when I met your mom, Carol, when we sang in a Youth for Christ singing group, Carpenter's Tools. And we together, of course, were we connected over a lot of things. We had a lot of things in common, but probably at the central core of it was we both loved music, and we loved God, and we had a desire to really follow hard after Him, be reckless abandon in our pursuit of being God followers, Jesus followers. And so when we sang in this singing group, Carpenter's Tools, and then as we graduated from high school and got married, we began a worship ministry of our own where we would go out and lead other churches in the area of worship. And that was in the 80s, in the 1980s. And so there was this whole movement towards contemporary worship, which is not really a movement anymore. It is what what worship has become. But back then, there was in the local church was quite a bit of division over traditional worship versus contemporary worship, and what does that really mean? And is worship about is it about a style of song or a style of worship, or is there something more than that? And so we really we ourselves navigated that in our ministry, but our primary passion and focus has always been that of the local church from a ministry standpoint. And so we were very instrumental in directing our church through that and giving leadership in our church through that time. Learned a lot of things, did a lot of things wrong that we would do over again if we could, but we gained a lot of perspective in leading worship together as a couple, leading a body of believers through a time when there was conflict, and whether it was when the church was trying to figure out what really is what are the non-negotiables. I like to think in terms of somebody said this to me. This is not an original thought of mine, but there are things in our faith that we should be willing to die for. Mm-hmm. And then there are things that we should have in the framework of defend. And then there are things that, we debate. This is theologically, right? So, an example of, die for is that, Jesus is the way to salvation. The Bible is the inerrant word of God. Things like that we believe in the resurrection, right? Without the resurrection, it's all for nothing.
Yeah.
And so those are things that you die for. Things that you debate are, baptism by immersion, or by infant baptism, or we believe what we believe, and this is what we think the Bible says, but certainly we're not going to die on that issue. Mm-hmm. And then there are things that we debate, so we had to learn in those early years about where does worship and style of music and all of that fall into those different categories. And then just to skip forward so the listeners can have a little bit of context, about 10 or between 10 and 15 years ago, I felt a strong calling in my life to pursue more of a leadership role within the church. And that really called me or led me away from leading worship. So Carol still is actively involved in the worship ministry at our church. I am not. And I think that gives me a unique perspective, having been in the ministry of the worship ministry and then having stepped away from it. And so if we get time today, I'll give a few insights about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Something that kind of piqued my thinking process as you were talking just now is we work with several churches through the ministry of Overflow Worship who are kind of in a transition period of what does it look like to integrate contemporary worship music into a service, or maybe they have two services. They have a traditional and they have a contemporary, and they're asking us questions of how to navigate through that, or they are sensing some conflict or just some tension. And I was just wondering, maybe there's one or two bits of encouragement or a little piece of advice that you could share of something that you learned along the way, and maybe you had to learn it the hard way, or maybe it was something you did right. But what could you say to those people to encourage them in their journey with that?
Yeah, great. That's great. I love that. I would say that one of the most valuable things that we did was we took time and created a document that was it's kind of a statement of worship, or a statement of our beliefs as a church, of how we saw where the church was going, to give the body really an idea of where this was going. A couple examples would be God is a multi-dimensional person, and so on one hand, God is high and lifted up. He is to be feared. He is to be revered. That is an aspect of God. Another aspect of God is that he has come near, right? And he's up close and personal and relational, right? And so in our document, we acknowledged both of those, that while it is true that God is high and lifted up and he is to be feared and revered, it is also true that God has come near and he wants a personal relationship with us. And so we said that the worship experience in our context was going to be more on the side of that God has come near, right? So what does that mean? What it looked like, and we said all this in the document, what it looked like is, the dress will be somewhat more casual, tend to be more casual. You won't see, the pastor in suit and tie, every Sunday. The music will tend to be more contemporary, and there will be more of drums instead of or drums and keyboard instead of organ. And what was very helpful for us, Andrea, I think it was helpful for us, but it was also very helpful for our body, is that the identification of what you could expect. And even as new people came into the body, then, they said, well, gee, I think we should be more like this, whatever this is, right? And we had something that we could point to and say, this is really who we believe God is calling us to be. And that's the thing is, just to, that's a key statement right there, is that who is God calling you to be? And it's not like, who do I want it to be? And certainly God leads through people, or who does, an individual want it to be, but really, who do we believe that God is calling us to be? And take the time to do the hard work to figure that out, and then spell it out. And that clarification was a game changer for us in unity of the body, in direction, in the recruiting of team members, worship people, singers, instrumentalists. It was just a game changer for us because of clarity, right? Clarity versus confusion. I guess is confusion the opposite of clarity? I'm not sure, but the more clarity you can create as a leader in your organization, the stronger your organization will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I call that a filter. It's like this filter that you can run all of your decisions through, and for those of you who are listening out there today, I just encourage you with that bit of this wisdom that was just shared, that casting a vision and kind of laying out, who you are and what you do and why you do it. But the key was what my dad just said, is who has God called you to be? And I work with so many churches now, and some of them, I hear them say, well, we're not like this church, or, are we supposed to sound like that church? Are we supposed to, fit into that mold? And my encouragement to them and to those who are listening is that you're called to serve a specific community, a specific body, and you're unique to that area. And so go before the Lord and ask him, what are you calling us to do? What do you want us to do in this community and serve this community? And something like that, like a kind of a vision statement, this document of who we are and what we're pursuing and what God has set before us, is so key, because you can use it like a filter. Like you said, if somebody comes and says, hey, let's do this. Okay, let's go back to kind of our core values and run it through that. And then the other thing that I hear in that and that I love is it's a teaching opportunity. For you back in the 80s, it was literally like worship school for the church, for all of you, for all of us. I was there too. I was little, but I was there. And it was like you had to teach the body what is worship. And like you said, define it. It's not a song. It's not a tempo. It's first a heart posture, and then, refining from there what God has called your church body to. But I think that's so key, to define your vision, define your, what God's called you to, and then be ready to teach the body and treat it like a teaching opportunity, because, a lot of times we need that. We need that permission or encouragement. Like it's, for example, a common phrase that is used in worship leadership a lot is, let's press in right now. And sometimes I think we wonder, like, what does that mean? And sometimes it just takes us taking a breath and pausing and just speaking to somebody who, hey, maybe you don't know what that means, or maybe this is new to you. And here's something you could do in this moment, So, and I know that's what you guys did, kind of through that process, is just, this is who we are. This is what God's called us to. And this is the vision we've laid out. And now let's learn together.
And you bring up a really good point, Andrea, about, let's say, press in. All right. So that is not a term that I'm familiar with. I mean, press in. And so but obviously in worship circles right now, it has a meaning or a context, but there are people out there that don't know what that is. And so helping your congregation, helping your team to understand what the context is, or what is the context behind the content. I remember we were a church that really wanted to be involved in outreach. We wanted to be an outward focused church, and we had a number of us in leadership had the very specific ideas of what outreach meant. I remember in a congregation. So one of the things we wanted to do was change the name of the church, right? We wanted to take, quote, Baptist out of the name of the church, and not because we aren't a Baptist church. It's just we wanted to remove barriers. That was how we were thinking outreach. And I remember a meeting where somebody stood up and very serious, very sincere, and said, hey, wait a minute, that's not what outreach means to me. What outreach means to me is that if somebody moves into town, they need to be able to open up the phone book and find the Baptist church. If it's a Baptist couple, they need to find the Baptist church, right? See, and I'm way past the point of saying one's right and the other's wrong. They're just different. And what the lesson for us in that is, the more clarity you can bring, the better it is. And even in the area of terms. So if you say, press in, well, what does it mean when we say to press in? And how can I press in? Because if I'm a God follower, if I'm a Jesus follower, I want to grow closer to him. And if somebody will present me, if a worship team, worship leader presents me with an idea or a concept, I want to know, I want to grow in that area, but I need to understand it. So that's great point about the kind of the terminology, is just getting people on the same page with what the context is, not just the content.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I believe our role as well, in my context, a worship leader, but really as a leader, period, is to bring people along with you well, right? Like, you got to lead them well, you got to bring them along well. And the number one aspect of that is clarity, right? And communication. And so for me, when I'm on the platform, if I'm not clear, or if I am not drawing people, and pointing them to the Lord well, with clarity and communication, then I'm not doing my job. And that doesn't mean I yap all the time. But if there's a moment of where we're waiting, we're going to be quiet, and then, explaining why we do that, or what to do. If there's a brand new person sitting in the church and they've never been to church before, look at it through their lens. Maybe they would want a little bit of context. I was at a church service last Wednesday night, and it was just so awesome because there was a moment for prayer, but it was very clear. The worship leader brought everybody along and explained, this is what's going to happen. And then there was still that moment of silence and waiting and just reflecting on the Lord. But it was clear for anybody who was uncomfortable in that. For me, I don't need any direction. I can just, I'm good with that, but I can't assume that everybody else is. And so it's huge. So shifting gears a little bit, but kind of along the same lines, how can we as leaders to our teams? So like you've led a worship team, and you've also, led elder boards and that kind of thing, and also lead a staff. So you have lots of different contexts to pull from. But what are one or two tips that you could give to our worship leaders out there of how to lead with clarity? What are some things that you've learned that would be helpful for them?
Well, I would say the first thing is, to be a great leader, you have to self-lead. You need to be great at leading yourself. And we probably all could think of people who have been leaders that have not led themselves well.
Right.
And so that's, from my perspective, that's where it begins, is leading yourself well. And, we could take the next 20 podcasts and talk about what is it, but I think your listeners have some probably pretty good ideas about how do you go about doing that well.
Well, it's funny because I got to tell you, listeners out there, I did not tell him to say that. This is kind of off book, but if you go back and listen to podcast episode number, 1, 2, and 3, they'll hear some of those, common threads with other interviews and other topics. So I love that because it's just it's huge, like it's foundational. So yes, continue.
So, second thing that comes to mind is when you are recruiting people, especially leaders in your organization. This would be, I could say, if you were hiring a staff person, if you're hiring a worship leader, and I know a lot of your listeners are worship leaders, but just hang with me through this example. Is that if you're hiring a leader or if you're recruiting a leader, are you looking for a vision, or are you recruiting to a vision? In other words, a lot of times churches are not clear enough, and ministries within churches are not clear enough about what they are and what they are not.
Yeah.
Right? We're so hey, it's I think it was Jim Collins in his book Good to Great said, it's probably more important than deciding who you are is spending the time to decide who you're not.
Yeah. It's
Right?
true. Yeah.
And so it's doing the hard work of clarifying that, and then as opposed to recruiting or hiring a vision, hiring somebody that has a great vision. It might be a great vision, but if it's not what God's called your body to be and do, then it's not the right person, even though they're a great person and even though there's incredible opportunity. So it's having clarity. That would be the second thing. And then I think the third thing that comes to mind is just the transformational mindset idea that instead of thinking about getting work done through people, what if we thought about worship as getting people done through work? Right? So let me say that again, because you can miss it.
Yeah.
It is as that, are we about getting work done through people? All right. So what would that be like? Well, we've got a worship service to put together, and we've got music to plan, and we've got to get the words into the computer, and we've got to talk with the pastor about what his message is. We've got to figure our transitions, we've got our segues, we got to get our instrumentation. See, all of that, that's the work that's got to be done.
Right.
And so are we getting work done, the project done through people? Or do we see our primary job is getting people done through the work that we do?
Yeah.
And that's a way more powerful concept. I mean, that's what Jesus was all about.
Yeah.
Is getting people done through work, getting people done through the miracles, all the miracles that he did. They were very intentional. They were with a purpose.
Yeah.
And he did, and you notice that he did them, he set them up differently.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what do you want me to do for you? What do you mean he didn't? Didn't he know? Sure, he knew.
Yeah.
But they needed to know, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes he healed from hey, he didn't even go there. Hey, just what? He's better, right? Just go back. And sometimes he made them wash their eyes with mud, right? Or he spit on the ground. And I mean, it was different things for different people. Why is that? Because he was about getting people done through the work that he did. And I think we need to, as leaders and as worship leaders, it's very important, because every Sunday there's another, forgive me for saying this because it's not a show, but I'm saying there is another event to put on.
Yeah.
Right.
Sunday always comes.
And that's right. It's demanding.
Yeah.
And you're done with Sunday, and Monday morning comes, and you got to get ready to do it all over again. I mean, that's the real world.
Yeah.
And so to keep in mind that, never lose sight of the fact that my job in ministry is to get people done through the work that I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an intentional choice. Like you were talking about the ministry of Jesus, like it was all intentional. And I feel just convicted in my life to live with intentionality, and to make sure that I keep my perspective in check and keep myself, in the right place. And so I think that's just huge for us as leaders. And it's encouraging to me and a good reminder to me too, to not let all the busyness get in the way, of the main thing. And I say that all the time, let's keep the main thing, but it sure is hard, when you've got all the work to do. So yeah, well, that's so great. I love this conversation, and I thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. And to all the listeners out there, I hope that you are encouraged to live with intentionality and to lead with clarity and communication. And, just want you to know that the Overflow Worship doors are always open. So if you have prayer requests or you have questions, just shoot them over to us. Our email is info@overflowworship.com. And also for worship leaders and worship team members, remember that we have the Overflow Worship Conference coming up again really soon in October on the 11th and 12th. And all the details are at overflowworship.com. And we would just love to see you there, whether you've been before or you've never been before. It's going to be a great weekend with Meredith Andrews and Jacob Suter and Todd Fields, who was my last guest on the podcast. And it's just going to be a great weekend. So I hope that you will join us, and I hope you were encouraged today. And again, Dad, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you very much. If you would like access to the document that Jeff referenced today that they built for their church, kind of their vision document for the worship ministry, if you'd like to see that, you can email us info@overflowworship.com and we can get that to you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. If you'd like to stay connected, please subscribe to our podcast. And if you want to learn more about Overflow, visit overflowworship.com. And remember, we love the church. We are for you and we're praying for you. Have a great day.